Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Free Thinking with Montel. My guest today has enjoyed a varied career in healthcare as a pediatrician, specializing in emergency medicine for nearly 20 years, before ultimately hanging up a stethoscope to pursue a new career as an independent well-being consultant. He's the founder of Behind Your Mask, which focuses on emotional well-being in the workplace, utilizing the power of storytelling. Lalith Wijedoru, welcome to Free Thinking with Montel, sir.
Thank you very much, Montel. Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you for being a part of the show today. You're based in the UK, but you consider yourself a third culture kid. Could you explain what that means and give me a little bit about your background?
So, third culture kid actually came from an American child psychologist. It was used to describe military children who, because of nature of their parents' work, moved around to lots of different countries. So even though they are of American heritage, that they were perhaps born in a different country and then grew up in a different country. And so with children who have been exposed to multiple cultures, they develop a third culture of actually their culture of their birth, culture of their genetics, as well as the culture of their environment. So in my situation, my genetics, I'm of Sri Lankan Sinhalese heritage. I was born in Hong Kong and grew up in Hong Kong and mainland China in Beijing, and I'm now functioning in a very Western European UK environment. So I've got South Asian, East Asian, and European influences in my life, and I'm very grateful for this exposure, and it's given me a third culture perspective.
Do you go back to China, mainland China at all?
I do. I go back to Hong Kong to see my school friends. I do go back as a tourist to mainland China and visit friends and colleagues from my past, from my teenage years. Yes.
Just as a side question, I mean, your Sri Lankan background, you are definitely of different ethnicity than the mainland China population. How are you treated? Do you see any discrimination? Do you see, how are you treated?
Um, of course, I think there are many cultures which have a degree of xenophobia. And so I think in China, there is a degree of anything that looks very different. And so I think visually, I clearly am very different from the Chinese. And so, yes, you get a lot of stares. And yes, you may get the side comments when people think that you don't understand what they're saying. And then, of course, there is always this curiosity about who you are. But I think it's very important in terms of integrating into a culture is to make efforts to speak the language, understand the culture. And I think by that cultural respect, you then lead to cultural understanding. They can tell me about their culture and I can share them about mine.
And you definitely must speak. Do you speak Cantonese, Mandarin? Which one?
So my Cantonese is, even though I spent longer as a child in Hong Kong, my Cantonese is conversational, but I grew up in China in the 90s where China was still very much closed. So my Mandarin is better than my Cantonese.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about your business. Tell me a little bit about, the whole idea behind the mask.
So behind your mask, people think now, because I came from a healthcare background working during the global pandemic, that the mask represents the COVID surgical mask that we use to protect our nose and mouth. Actually, it's not. The mask represents our personal and our professional masks that we wear to perhaps conceal who we really are. And so behind your mask it represents the stories that we conceal behind our masks. And I use storytelling, the sharing of personal stories in the workplace where people can connect with each other as humans. And so my role as a storytelling facilitator empowers and motivates people to drop that mask temporarily, where they can actually show themselves as a more human person in their workplace.
I mean, give me an idea of just what this means, because when you're looking at places like the United States, where there seems to be this pushback right now going on over the last 5 or 6 years, and more than that, maybe 7 or 8 years, where there is a pushback against diversity. There's a pushback against inclusion. What types of stories are you talking about telling in the workplace to better the workplace environment?
I'm very glad that you actually mentioned about diversity and inclusion, because actually a lot of the work that I do, I'm asked to talk, use stories in the diversity inclusion space. So I'm very interested in all stories, but the common stories and the common themes that I'm asked to talk about are about identity, and so identity, what makes up our identity. It's a complex interplay of, you mentioned about third culture, about your ethnicity, your genetics, or where you grew up, but then it's also about the role of the job that you do. You have to think about your gender, your sexuality. It's a very complex interplay.
With
And
being
so,
that complex, we've got issues here in the United States where there are more and more and more businesses that are fighting diversity. They're fighting inclusion. They are so. It would seem to me that in some ways, telling stories about my individuality based on who I am, whether it be ethnicity, sexual orientation, and other things, in the United States, would cause the ire of some business leaders. You know what I mean? I mean, there are some who
yeah,
don't give it. Excuse my mouth when I say it this way, but who don't give
no,
a damn and don't want you to
no,
give a damn. They want to make sure that they have a ethnically non-diverse workplace, or at least an ethnically non-identifiable workplace. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And
no, I absolutely
that seems to
agree.
be growing. That's the mentality that seems to be growing in the U.S., which is I often say, whether we in the United States want to admit it or not, though we don't lead the world, I think, in anything, we claim to have a lot of ideas that we created ourselves, and we steal a lot of ideas from others and claim them for ourselves. And then we turn around and disdain those that made the ideas. It's so strange. So, I mean, I get what you're doing. You're in the UK, so I'm assuming that this paradigm is acceptable in the UK, right?
Oh no! Don't get me wrong. I have to fight very hard to actually get people to understand and acknowledge diversity. So I hear exactly what you were saying, and I meet many people, not just in US corporations, but also in European and Asian corporations. But my message is this: my message is, do exclude or not embrace diversity at your peril. And the reason why I say this is because a new generation of workforce are looking for leaders who are diverse and inclusive. People are looking for managers that pride on interactions rather than transactions. And so when we think about the great resignation and the great exodus of people voting with their feet and their jobs, new generations of employees are looking for open and inclusive cultures. And diversity is a business. It shouldn't be a nice, fluffy thing to think about. It is a business imperative.
But
You are a stronger organization.
well, I don't mean to interrupt you, but let me just say this. I, for years now, have used this phrase here in the United States that I've said, we are at the point of the last stand of the redneck. And I've realized, how caustic that is to say that to begin with, because I'm basically lumping a whole group together, and that's not what I meant to do. However, what I do mean to do is lump the old minded thinkers of yesterday in a single group. And we are in their last stand. There are people in this world who are the baby boomer generation and older, who are, I think, responsible for the majority of the hate in this world. Now, I could be wrong, but this is my view. And I think until they all die off, we are at a point in societies worldwide where, boom, there's two trains coming down a track. We've got a younger generation that is more accepting of humanity, and we've got an older generation who's trying their damnedest to make sure that they leave their print on the younger generation so that they can extend this hatred into the next millennia. And so when we look at like here in the United States, I mean, again, the term diversity, inclusion, all those things are becoming dirty words in our society because that generation is trying to hold on. And as we see all over the world, this has trickled out all over the world, where the rest of those old fucks, excuse my mouth, or old farts are, continuing to try to perpetuate the evil that they have placed on this planet. How do you overcome that when we still have generational leaders who are trying to imbue that on their younger employees?
I love everything that you say because you touch on a lot of what I do. You mentioned the word generations, and the word that the phrase that I like to use when it comes to storytelling is engaging in intergenerational dialogue. If I can give you an example from my own country, so Sri Lanka, we have been subject to over a quarter century of civil war, and what is it? Is because based on on ethnic conflict. And when I was here in the UK, we united the Sri Lanka diaspora and to talk about our different opinions on the ethnic conflict. And the generation, the boomers that you talk about, one of them said something really quite beautiful. He said, "We are a package holiday. We are, as you said, embedded in our thoughts. This is what you see is what you get, and we are probably not going to change." But actually, what needs to happen is the dialogue from them to understand how they have been imprinted and to connect that with a very different generational way of thinking. It's intergenerational dialogue that is very important and is very much needed. And so even in the workplace, just looking at attitudes between work ethic will vary very greatly between a baby boomer and a generation X and a generation Z. But the pendulum is swinging. The pendulum is swinging, and what this essentially boils down to is workplace culture. What culture do you want in your organization? And storytelling can be a way, particularly intergenerational dialogue, can be a way to foster and engender an open and inclusive culture where people can listen to different points of views and personal stories.
Do you? I mean, I clearly, again, you're doing most. Do you do most of your work in Europe, or do you do some work in the United States?
I have got a number of clients in the United States and Canada, and yes, there are strong cultural differences. I think the thing that I find different about working in North America is hierarchy. I find that hierarchy is far more established in the United States, either whether it's because of organized religion or whether it's because of military practices, I don't know. But there is a strong sense of hierarchy that is challenged often by this concept of storytelling.
But isn't it very interesting though? That whole sense of hierarchy is a generational thing. I would venture to say that you probably see that whole, a sense of I don't know, what do you want to call it? In the older generation or the generation, the baby boom generation, they're the ones who are still holding on to that sense of some sort of position in society that
Yes.
they throw people in. Whereas when you look at the Generation Z and the Xers, they are not as focused on that because they recognize and accept their friends for who they are. I go back and forth with some of my friends when I do political debates and things, and recognize that maybe I'm a little hard on this, but I feel as if we're at a point right now where this baby boomer generation will do anything it can to tear down the last vestiges of their own society to hold on to that hierarchy of power and try to destroy, opportunity for future generations rather than say, our ideas are antiquated, rather than say that maybe we were wrong. Go ahead. What were we going to say?
I hear what you're saying. I also feel that, and I was very interested in what you said about the last stand of the redneck. But at
Right.
the end of the day, baby boomers, rednecks, whoever you are, you all have a view. We all have a view as humans, and those views have been formed through our life experiences. And through storytelling, it is very important to listen deeply with the intention to understand someone rather than with the intention to reply to somebody. And it is through story that when we listen to why somebody thinks the way that they think, or a story which explains, their conditioning or the way that they think, actually this will lead to greater and deeper understanding. The outcome may still be that we will agree to disagree, but at least that we have listened to each other and have got a mutual respect and understanding for that disagreement.
Well, that's the one thing I got to tell you something. I listen to you speak, and from a virtuistic standpoint, I think this is like amazing. This is something that every business should want to incorporate. But I also look at the realities here in this country where rather than hate be on the decline, hate seems to be on the rise. When businesses say, well, we don't, when we have governors of states want to throw out the entire idea of acknowledging diversity in universities, or in the learning situation, and want to throw out the entire idea of multiculturalism, want to throw out as if this country is one culture, which it never was, never was built on, never was meant to be. However, there are those who want to reestablish this one viewpoint, and as much as I think that Generation Z takes 2 steps forward, baby boomers want to take 4 steps back. You know what I mean? They want to knock it down. There are literally laws being passed in this country to try to stop the implementation of inclusion rather than work towards what inevitably is going to be what makes mankind successful for the next millennium.
Mm. But I go back to what you said about this anti-diversity that the people are clinging on. And again, I will give this my prophet of doom. Think this is about your corporate reputation, and I would ask business leaders to think about this. What do your employees, both present or prior employees, what do they say about your place of work? And again, thinking about the new generations that are probably having higher rates of turnover because of clashes of culture within organizations, those TripAdvisor reviews of organizations are going to actually directly impact your recruitment and your retention. And if you want to think about money in the bottom line, how much does it cost to hire and retain your staff? If you've got high rates of staff turnover, this is detrimental to your business. And so again,
and we've been seeing that's something that I'm glad you brought that up, but I think we see that here in the United States, and I hear this from lots of business people who, guys who I know own their own businesses, guys who are trying to fill the ranks of their businesses, who complain, oh, this generation, I can't keep them employed. They work for a couple of weeks and then they just up and quit. Well, they quit because they don't like what comes out of your mouth. I mean, that's what I want to say to them, but they don't get that. They think that, no, we've been doing this way for the last,
yes.
80 years, and we're going to do this until we drop. And it's like, it's so ignorant how detrimental that is to their success, but they are going to hold on to this as if it's like the last bastion before the big flood, or the last little piece of dirt before the big flood. They're going to hold on to that little piece of dirt thinking, oh, the water's not going to get me. The water's going to get you. You know what I'm saying? The flood's going to deluge everybody. So, I mean, you have because of the diversity of your own background, being a pediatrician, working in multiple countries, and why don't you just share with our audience, you've been worked in medicine basically all over the world, right?
So I'm very fortunate. So my motivation to study medicine and eventually pediatrics actually came from being doing my work experience when I was at school in China for UNICEF. And I worked in a rural province in China looking at vaccination uptake. Now, I know vaccination is a very controversial topic, particularly in this in this post-COVID era. But
that right there, see, that's one of those things that I want to say again. That's that last stand of the redneck. You know what I mean? You're trying to put something in me, that it's going to track me when I go to the bathroom. I mean, it's like the amount of ignorance that this has engendered in conversations. It blows my mind. We recognize that the polio vaccination worked very well. We recognize that the measles vaccination worked very well. We recognize that all those things that we vaccinated against, which were historical diseases that wiped out populations, we recognize that they were valued. But this new vaccine, they did this conspiratorially because they want to be able to check if I ate broccoli yesterday. It's like, I just don't get it.
It's true. And so the reason why, what motivated me was, it was looking at female literacy. If you look at the education of mothers in resource limited settings, they are more likely to vaccinate their children. And so for me, having studied a lot of kind of social science and psychology, I was fascinated with this concept that, a maternal literacy could affect vaccination uptakes, could affect uptake of contraception, reduce the birth space, and make women more likely to look after their children effectively. And so that impact on global health, I thought was really amazing. And so I was very interested, wanted to work in global child health, and I did a master's degree at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, which opened up opportunities for me to work with the Oxford University Tropical Research Network, which took me to places like Laos, Cambodia, Bangladesh, to look at the care of children in resource limited settings. And I was very interested in diseases which were associated with fever, and distinguishing diseases like typhoid from malaria from dengue. So that was my research interest, and I'm very fortunate to have had those opportunities.
And in all those locations that you've gone to, I mean, you've talked about this openly, I think, that you've been the target of bullying throughout your life. And some of those experiences have been what helped shape the entire idea about behind your mask, right?
Absolutely. And I think we have to think about, if you just think about any of our workplaces, rightly or wrongly, our work will wound us emotionally in some way, whether it is the people that we work with, whether it is the people that we have to deal with, if you're in a people facing business, and of course our life and how that affects our work. Our work will inadvertently wound us. And so it is very important to acknowledge the social and emotional impact that our work has on us. And so if we don't address those impacts, then actually those are the things that will lead to burnout. And particularly working in healthcare, which inevitably there is a strong emotional burden. I worked in pediatric in ER, where you see child abuse, child death, very angry parents. It will have an effect on you. We are all human. And so if
We are seeing that here. We're seeing that here in the United States because there is a mass exodus right now in the United States from the nursing community, from doctors. A lot of people have burned out now because of they blame COVID, but some of it has been, not just COVID related. It's COVID exacerbated in the sense that, and I know this is something that maybe you can help me understand too. Why is it? And that's the wrong question. I shouldn't say why, but don't you feel as if there was a global shift in the last 4 or 5 years that happened, simultaneous with COVID worldwide, but it's almost as if the entire planet at the same time, I don't care what country you're in, all of a sudden, rather than not accepting, but I guess what am I trying to say? Rather than understanding individuals and the way we communicate, now people just come to the table ready to fight. People come to the table, but I mean, they walk into I've seen it walking into a Starbucks, want to order a cup of coffee, and the barrister asked you a question. I'm sorry, did you say latte? Oh, you heard me. I know you know what I said. I said, it's like, calm down. It's like, where did all of a sudden our blood pressures jump through the roof? Where did all of a sudden that we just decide that, our individual space is so important that I can belittle anybody I talk to?
That is so
You know what I
interesting.
mean?
I think what you have just described are unhealed emotional wounds. And I'm going to illustrate this with actually a client from the hotel and hospitality sector. A front of line manager who is used to be working in front of house in a hotel had welcomed their regular customers, people with money, very, very happy, came to London and enjoyed their time in London, go to the theatre, nice place to eat, and welcoming, and oh, here's your drink that you like because we know you because you're our regular customer. And so then this is all pre-pandemic. The pandemic happens, and then as people start to come back to using hospitality, the same people start coming back, but they're completely different to the same staff. As you described, they're angry, they're irritated, they're complaining, they're hypercritical of everything that the hotel has done, even though it is no different. In fact, probably better than what was happened pre-COVID. But it's not good. Nothing is ever good enough. But what I think this is all the traumas that happened to people during the pandemic, the isolation, the lack of touch, the not able to recharge your batteries, the uncertainty, the fear of dying, losing loved ones alone. All of these traumas that happened during the pandemic affect how they function post-pandemic. And so the part of the reason why I want to do what I do is to help people address these emotional wounds through sharing personal stories behind your mask.
It's very interesting the way you describe that also, and I agree with you. I think what's happened is that again, because of the pandemic, for whatever reason, being tied up and pent up and those things, we are getting right now, the world is going through the post pandemic, a
Mhm.
pandemic of mental health issues, a pandemic of PTSD. I mean, I work, and I know a very close friend of mine, Dr. Jonathan Saki here. We're working together and have worked together for a while now on, a couple of projects, and we're working together on another project that I have to work that deals with neurological disorders utilizing a medical device. But I also have been working to try to get people to understand that, I think what the world is going to have to open its eyes up to right now is that we are at a critical mass when it comes to the pandemic of mental health issues. There are people suffering from PTSD that don't even know they're suffering from PTSD. We have people who spent, I guess there's a theory out right now that if you spent more than 3 days in the hospital for COVID, the majority of those people, 40% of them, have a PTSD issue that they don't even want to recognize because, think about it, laying in a bed and these people coming in and out of your room in spacesuits and you're isolated, you can't touch anybody, you can't say hello, you can't move your mouth, you got a hose down your throat. I mean, and then you walked out of the hospital and nobody really said everything's okay now. They said, oh, you have to really be careful. So now you have to really be careful because you get long-term COVID. Oh, or if you didn't get it the first time, you might get it the next time. Oh my goodness, we better get another vaccination because it's like we seem to be living in this era of fear and reticence and how open are the businesses that you talk to about wanting to bring your services into their business to help them recognize. And first, also explain to me, how does it work? You go to a business and you say, look, I think I can help you with some of your issues that you have going on with relating to your employees and back and forth. So maybe we ought to sit down and have a session. I mean, how do you do this?
So you're absolutely so getting into an organization from my perspective is very hard. The reason why is because people cannot quantify the benefit of what I do. Can I attribute what I do in terms of creating psychological safe spaces for people to share stories? How does that affect your bottom line? And that's the question I get asked a lot. And I think the things that I want to ask is, how much is your recruitment and retention and people on long-term sick? How much is that costing you? And so that's my response. The way that I work with organizations is actually I ask, what are the pain points in your organization? And it very much depends on different organizations. It may be a problem with retention. It may be a problem with long-term sick. It may be a problem with poor engagement and staff engagement survey scores, or it might be understanding of diversity and inclusion. And so what I feel that storytelling could be used at every stage of the employee life cycle, from recruitment right through to learning and development. So to answer your question about how it works, essentially what it is, it requires a 1 hour session where it's a psychologically safe space where minimum of 2, maximum of 4 members of staff prepared by me in advance share a short 5-minute story on a theme in front of their colleagues. And after those stories are shared, a facilitated discussion takes place where the people listening, the audience, the colleagues, the co-workers, can respond to the stories that they've heard in a psychologically safe space without fear or judgment. And what this does is this creates a good listening environment. It creates compassion and kindness and connection, and it allows people to deeply listen to each other and creates an open and inclusive culture.
But I would imagine that it also, just the fact that I get some off work time with my fellow employees to just share allows me to empathize with them and brings that level of, what do you want to call it, angst down in my company, right?
Absolutely right. And if you think about the research from Harvard and Forbes, if they look at what are the new leadership skills that are needed for a post-pandemic digital age, number 1, curiosity, creativity, and comfort with ambiguity. But the leading one is empathy. That's what people want. The people who are being led want empathetic leaders. And how do you empathize with people? You listen to them deeply. And so if we're going to create compassionate workplaces, empathetic leaders, authenticity, compassion, storytelling is an excellent way to pause, reflect, and to deeply connect with your colleagues.
And I mean, just outline it for those again at home or people who are listening tuning in. What are some of the biggest problems facing today's workforce, and how does this process help address it?
So if we think about what are the things that contribute to burnout, so I think one of them is things like chronic excessive workload. That constant barrage, where your internal battery is just depleted without chance to
Being on the habit trail.
um
Sorry, I'm sorry.
go, yeah. So
No,
we're
I'm
being
saying being on the habit trail, always having to have, every day he's got to have an accomplishment. If you don't have an accomplishment today, oh my goodness, you're a failure. So you're going backwards. Oh, let's get back on our habit trail. It's like, I
absolutely.
think that the day and the time is done where this next generation said, okay, I watched that. And, I'm so sorry, but I think you all are full of shit. Excuse me. I mean, when you talk to some of the Gen Zers, they're like, yeah, this whole idea of this 50 hours a week and I got to just push myself and push myself and push myself. Every day I got to do at least 2 hours of overtime. And every single day I got to come up with something that I did. It's like, why? Why
Yeah,
do I have to do this? And for a little while I thought, oh, come on, you slacker, yeah, pick up the pace, you got to do your thing. And then I stopped and said, wait a second. No, it's not that. Whoever said that, 80 hours a week is the right thing to do?
yeah,
Whoever told us that just because a couple people decided that for their bottom line, for them to make a couple billion off of the backs of the people who are working hard, I'm gonna push them until they drop. Um, people are starting to say, "No, you ain't pushing me until I drop, brother. I'm gonna do my job for you, but you need to chill out, right?"
absolutely.
And we had again that last stand of the redneck, or that last stand of this generation that wants to hold on. No, this is the only way I can control you. I got to control you. What
The
do you
other
see
thing,
the workplace of tomorrow becoming?
well, why I'm doing what I'm doing is I'm going to go on Martin Luther King and say I have a dream, and
Yeah.
the dream is that we have a workforce and workplaces which are flexible, workplaces which are inclusive, work cultures which are compassionate. Because it's when you have those type of humanized workplace. If we are humans, we need to get the best of us as humans. And the sooner that we can accept that truth that we are humans and the flaws of ourselves and that life will sometimes get in the way, the easier, more positive, and even more fun our work lives can be. And if you have a happy, engaged workforce, you won't have to worry about your bottom line. You'll be productive as hell.
But sometimes you have to talk about those uncomfortable truths to get to the next level
Yeah.
where you are accepting.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get people to understand that it's okay to talk about uncomfortable things as long as we accept at the end of the day that each individual has a right to their own opinion.
And,
And
and
how do you go, I'm sorry. And how do you convince, again, that diehard employer who is still trying to, turn up and ratchet up the speed on that habit trail to calm down, take your hand off that button,
yeah.
allow the speed of your employees to be self identifying.
Hmm. It's funny what you mentioned about the uncomfortable truth. There was a really good quote. There's a street artist called Banksy, and he's got an exhibition in London at the moment. And there is a quote by a Mexican human rights activist and educator from Harvard, and his name is Cesar A. Cruz. And his quote is used to advertise the street art exhibition, and it says, "Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable." And I really think that is a great way to think about how stories, and the art of storytelling, um, the art of storytelling needs to disrupt. It can disrupt and be uncomfortable. And everyone thinks, oh, it's great to have happy stories. And don't get me wrong, I love hilarious, funny stories which show our human side and the close to the bone, politically incorrect. I love those. But I do also acknowledge that a lot of what people want to share, the hidden stories, are about uncomfortable truths, about discrimination, about hardship, about the uncomfortable truths of life. But it's through discomfort that we will grow. And that's how organizations will grow. And they need to realize that.
Absolutely. And now during this age that we live in right now, this digital age, is it harder for people to make that and maintain that human connection?
Absolutely. And so, the strapline of my business is called Project, Reflect, Connect. And it's through stories that I think that we can remain connected. If we think about these multinational organizations with a legal team in South America and a sales team in East Asia, geographically we are disconnected. Culturally we are disconnected. And how do we maintain connection, in person, digitally? I really think human stories. We need to connect as humans, and um, this whole approach of creating humanized workplace is essential to business success.
I mean, even what we're doing, you and I are doing right now, though I try my best to make this as human a conversation as we possibly can have. We're doing this over the internet.
Yeah.
So and there's no joke. I mean, there's no illusion. Those at home that are watching us know that you and I are not sitting in the same room together. But I believe that that's done the entire idea of communication a disservice. What I'm doing, I believe, is part of the disservice. I thought back when I started in talk years ago, I I don't take credit for it, but I got to tell you, we can take the blame for some of the foibles of today's society. Because I think what we did in talk when talk was early is that we glorified the fringe in a way that made the fringe think that they were the norm, and they weren't the norm. And then society started thinking that they were the norm, and they weren't the norm. So, everybody likes to be able to look through a little pee hole or a keyhole to examine someone else's life, but that life is so far from who they are that they really can't relate other than just look at it from an entertainment standpoint.
Hmm.
And like right now, what we're doing, I think best we can is attempt to show compassion in conversation, understanding in different ideals, and share that with a larger audience. That's one thing that I think the internet does do, and virtual reality does give us the opportunity to span universes that we've never spanned before. However, I also think that it becomes scary for some leaders, because I'll just click and delete that rather than listen to that. You know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I understand. And when you mentioned about leaders, leaders are very frightened of being authentic and being vulnerable because, again, there is this culture of that leadership should not be, that vulnerability is a sign of weakness. But it really, I think it's Brene Brown who said that the vulnerability is not weakness. That vulnerability is actually the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And if organizations are going to evolve and be adaptable and deal with this comfort or discomfort of ambiguity and uncertainty, they have to be adaptable. And vulnerability is a key part of that. I remember during the pandemic, I did storytelling for the chief executive leadership team of a children's hospital, and one of the themes was about leadership. And one of the concepts and the themes that came out was about visibility. How can you be a visible leader in a time of disconnect and social distancing? And I would ask leaders the same. How are you a visible leader to a hybrid workforce? And I think that sharing a bit of your vulnerability or your authenticity and you as a human will do far more in connecting and inspiring the people that you lead.
You just gave me one of them. Give me some more examples of some of the diverse workforces that you have gone in and helped, establish some training for, and what its outcome was after it was done.
And so I feel great because I work in any work sector, any organization that has a team, I'm there. So one example is from performing arts. I worked with a youth orchestra and looking at their well-being. And so I retrained as a massage therapist because I was deprived of touch as somebody who lived alone during the pandemic. And so I retrained as a massage therapist. So as part of my well-being package, I did massaging and storytelling. And I did this with the youth orchestra during their summer tour. And the themes that we did during the storytelling sessions, one was about pride, another one was about respect, another one was about identity, and another one was about impossible. And what happened was, it's through over the course of these young people, 16 to 25, who don't normally play with each other, by connecting with each other, suddenly their levels of performance started to go up. That even the conductor said to me, I've noticed a change in the orchestra. And then the press even noticed in the quality of their performance. And I can't say it's all me, but I think that part of this thing about connecting a high performance team of people who have anxieties and high performance anxiety is really good in actually creating better team performance. So that's just one example. I've worked with sales teams who perhaps that post-pandemic there was a lack of staff engagement as things came, sales performances went down. And then when I did storytelling sessions where we shared how their personal values align with the values of their team and the organization, suddenly the sales team became more engaged with the organization and their team, and sales went up by 30% over 6 months. And so again, there's going to be so many different ways that connection, human connection through being authentic and humanized can actually improve performance.
How do you plan to expand your reach in the next couple of years?
Basically, I think the first thing is to get people to recognize that this is something that is important. A humanized workplace, a compassionate workplace, authenticity. I think that's the key. I think before I can expand, I almost still need to spread the gospel that this is something that is very much needed. I mean, there are plenty of people out there talking about well-being of the workforce, our individual well-being and things. But what I think the thing where I'm unique is that I believe in storytelling for emotional well-being, but storytelling that can affect anything from learning and development to staff retention to appraisal even. Using stories throughout an organization at every stage of the employee life cycle could just create a different culture. So the way I want to upscale is basically just spread the gospel and make people realize this is what a new generation of workforce are looking for.
So where would people go if they wanted to get more information?
They can contact me on my website, which is behindyourmask.co. And on there's my social media links. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, and X, formerly known as Twitter.
Anything else you want to add?
Anything I want to add? I mean, really, I just want to talk about the technology very, very, very quickly.
Sure.
I was painted by a Mexican-born artist. She was a former associate professor at Columbia in New York. And she was inspired by us using storytelling to support the workforce of the pandemic. And she painted us. And it's just, when you talked about the technology, I insisted that I was painted with my laptop. And her response was, oh no, please don't make me. She's a Mexican, vibrant, colorful folk artist. She goes, technology and laptops, it's really cold. It's not very human. It doesn't sound like that's the vibe that you want, that you give off with your humanized storytelling. And I said, I want you to put it in because it is the technology that has kept us connected. We did this entirely online during a time when we could not touch or be with each other. And so that's why I want to highlight that in this digital age, technology can be our friend. It can be the bane of our lives, but we can use it to connect through human story.
And human stories, I mean, I guess you help individuals figure out their own story and the way to tell it, correct?
Absolutely. And it's an honor. And as a doctor, I have spent a whole career of listening to people's stories of their health or their symptom. Tell me about your cough. Tell me about your headache. And it's a story and a context. And so the biggest feedback, the strongest theme of feedback that I've got from using staff stories is that it is healing. And people say, oh, but this is a very different job. You're not practicing as a doctor. You're now doing storytelling. I said, the goal is the same. Instead of healing children and families through practice of Western medicine, I'm now actually healing people, adults, organizations, teams, through the healing power of stories.
That's incredible. Well, sir, we wish you so much luck. And so, what's next?
What's next for me?
What's coming next for you? Yeah.
I would like to do more podcasts. I think I was thinking part of this thing, I would love to get stories of everyday people in the workplace, use podcasts to share these stories and to connect with people across workforces. So I would like to very much upscale my kind of media presence, but very much focus on the stories of us everyday people.
Well, thank you so much for being a part and telling those stories today on our podcast, and we'd love to have you back sometime. And we should try to figure out a way to get you back here couple months and let's do it again, okay?
I would be delighted, Montel. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for being a part of the show. And I want you guys all to remember you can always get this kind of information right here at Free Thinking with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Free Thinking with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please send us your comments.